The Cleveland Browns must not mess this up. I repeat, the Cleveland Browns must not mess.
The Cleveland Browns must not mess this up. That is not a suggestion. That is not a hot take. That is a warning. And by the time we are 12 minutes deep into this video, every single person watching is going to understand exactly why the Cleveland Browns front office is sitting on a live grenade and calling it a quarterback competition. This is the story of Shedeur Sanders, son of a legend, 5th-round steal of the century, the most talked about rookie quarterback in the NFL, arriving at training camp in the best shape of his life, outrunning the noise, outworking the doubt, and somehow still being forced to audition for a job that should already have his name on the door. This is the story of a franchise so committed to its own dysfunction that it drafted a generational asset and then immediately started looking for reasons not to play him. And by reasons, I mean excuses. And by excuses, I mean the ghost of Deshaun Watson, a contract so catastrophic it deserves its own true crime documentary. Stay with me through this one. Because by the 10-minute mark of this video, you are going to understand exactly who benefits from keeping Shedeur Sanders on the bench, and I promise you, it is not the Cleveland Browns.
For that opening, Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience except these last hope attempts that maybe some pennies would be worth it on a team.
Let us set the scene. It is the 1st of July. Training camp is weeks away. And while every other quarterback in this league is resting, managing their offseason, protecting their brand, Shedeur Sanders is outside in the heat, cleats on, running routes, doing speed work, getting his body into what his trainer described as football shape, over an hour of work. Cotton on his back, no pads, no fanfare, just a man who understands that the opportunity in front of him is not guaranteed and who is responding to that uncertainty the only way a Sanders knows how, by outworking everyone in the building. Now here is the payoff stat I need you to hold on to for the rest of this video, because we are coming back to it. According to the analysis shared on NFL Live, analysis that was, and by shared I mean weaponized against him, Shedeur Sanders was inaccurate on more than 1 out of every 5 attempts last season. 1 out of every 5, that is the number the national media grabbed and ran with. That is the number they put on the screen to make the case that this kid is not ready, and I need you to remember that number, because in about 4 minutes we are going to completely dismantle what it actually means. The Cleveland Browns front office is the primary villain of this story. Let me be completely clear about that from the jump. Not Shedeur, not his father Deion Sanders, not the media, though they are certainly complicit. The front office. The people who constructed one of the worst offensive environments in the history of the National Football League handed a rookie quarterback the keys to a burning building and then had the audacity to grade him on how well he drove.
This is the truest quarterback competition in the NFL. What I mean by that is whoever performs best in training camp should be the week one.
Here is what the front office of the Cleveland Browns gave Shedeur Sanders in his rookie season, an offensive line that analysts described, on record, on camera, as the worst they had ever seen, not one of the worst, fellow rookies blocking for him. A wide receiver room so thin that the question was not whether the weapons were good, but whether they existed at all. And to top it all off, the entire operation was anchored to the dead weight of the Deshaun Watson contract, a deal that has not been worth anything, that produced nothing, and that consumed the salary cap oxygen that could have gone toward building an actual supporting cast around your franchise quarterback. Think about what that means in practice. Think about what it looks like on a football field. Shedeur Sanders drops back. The pocket collapses in under 2 seconds. He has no time to process, no time to go through his reads, no time to do the things that made him a consensus top quarterback prospect coming out of Colorado. And then, and this is where it gets genuinely infuriating, and by infuriating I mean almost impressive in its audacity, the national media takes his completion percentage and puts it on a graphic and says, "See, he is not accurate, he is inaccurate on more than 1 out of every 5 attempts." It is like evaluating a Formula 1 driver by his lap times and forgetting to mention that you gave him a car with 3 wheels. I want you to sit with that analogy for a second, because that is exactly what happened. The Cleveland Browns front office built a 3-wheeled car, handed it to their most exciting young driver, watched him struggle to keep it on the road, and then let the national media run the lap time comparison against drivers who had full vehicles. That is not analysis. That is a setup. If you are finding this breakdown valuable, please subscribe to Hot News right now and turn on your notifications, because we are going to be all over this story as training camp opens, and you do not want to miss what happens next.
Shedeur Sanders was in an offense last year that was the worst in the National Football League. Okay? I don't care what any statistic says. If the Browns were not last, they were second or third or fourth to last in basically every statistic. And they led the
Now, let us talk about the quarterback competition, because the Cleveland Browns front office wants you to believe this is a genuine, open, fair competition. And by genuine, open, and fair, I mean a situation where a rookie who produced nothing because he had nothing to work with is being asked to beat out a veteran quarterback who produced nothing because, and this is the part they do not say out loud, he is Deshaun Watson, and the front office needs to justify the most catastrophic contract in modern NFL history. Here is the business argument, and I need every single person watching this to understand the money framing here. Deshaun Watson's contract is not just a football problem, it is a balance sheet problem. It is an asset liability problem. The Cleveland Browns front office paid a dead-end investment at a level that crippled their ability to build around any quarterback, and now they are sitting on Shedeur Sanders, who is the most valuable asset this franchise has acquired in years, and they are entertaining the idea of not starting him from day one. That is not franchise management. That is self-sabotage dressed up in press conference language about competition and process. Do not take my word for it. Listen to what the analysts who actually watch the film have to say.
For that opening, Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience except these last hope attempts that maybe some pennies would be worth it on a deal that has not.
Did you catch that? The Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience. Those are not my words. That is the analytical conclusion from people who study this game professionally. There is nothing to gain. Zero. Null. The Deshaun Watson chapter of Cleveland Browns football has produced nothing of value, and the front office is still entertaining the possibility that running it back one more time somehow unlocks a different outcome. That is the definition of institutional insanity. And by insanity, I mean the kind of front office thinking that keeps franchises irrelevant for decades while their best assets age out and move on. Now let me walk you through the two routes, because the analysts laid this out with a clarity that the Cleveland Browns front office apparently cannot access on their own. Route 1, Shedeur Sanders starts, gets real reps with a real offensive line, and by real offensive line I mean the upgraded one the Browns actually spent money on this offseason, and real weapons in Jerry Jeudy, Fallon, Benzaline Boston, and the rest of the receiving core they brought in. He exceeds expectations. He shows the league he is an NFL starting quarterback. The Browns have their franchise player. They have their economic engine. They have the one draw that puts people in seats and eyeballs on screens for the next decade. That is Route 1. Route 2, he struggles. He does not move the needle. And guess what? The Browns have draft capital. They collected picks specifically for this kind of contingency. They can trade up. They can rebuild. They rip the Band-Aid off, they win 2 or 3 or 4 games, and they come out of the season with clarity and ammunition for the next draft. That is Route 2. I want every single person watching this to tell me which of those two routes involves starting Deshaun Watson, because I cannot find it. I genuinely cannot locate the version of this story where giving Watson snaps in 2025 helps the Cleveland Browns in any direction, on any timeline, in any universe.
The Cleveland Browns must not mess this up. I repeat, the Cleveland Browns must not mess.
This is the truest quarterback competition in the NFL. And what Field Yates is saying there, what the most credible voices in professional football analysis are saying, is that in Cleveland, unlike in most other cities, whoever performs best in training camp should actually be the Week 1 starter, not the veteran by default. Not the name recognition, the best performer, the most ready player, the one who shows up to camp having spent his entire offseason getting his body right, working on his craft, running routes in cotton in the July heat. Now, here is where the pattern of institutional self-sabotage becomes impossible to ignore. The Cleveland Browns front office has a documented history of mismanaging the quarterback position. This is not a new story. This is a franchise that has cycled through more starting quarterbacks than most teams have had in their entire existence, and what has been the consistent thread running through every single one of those cycles? The front office, the decision makers, the people upstairs who keep making the same category of error, prioritizing the sunk cost over the future asset, protecting the bad investment instead of developing the good one. And now they have Shedeur Sanders, the money. The one reason the national media is paying attention to Cleveland Browns training camp in a way they have not in years, the asset that, if developed correctly, if given the tools and the reps and the runway, could be the economic engine of this franchise for the next 15 years. And the front office is sitting there running a quarterback competition with a player whose contract represents the single worst financial decision in the history of their organization. It is like a restaurant that spent its entire budget on a head chef who cannot cook, and now they have found a young prodigy in the kitchen who is turning heads, and instead of handing him the apron, they are making him compete for the job against the guy who burned down the previous restaurant. While the investors watch, while the customers wait, while the reservation list gets shorter every week, that is not hyperbole. That is not me hyping this up for the sake of a video. That is simply the math of what is happening in Berea, Ohio right now.
For that opening, Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience except these last hope attempts that maybe some pennies would be worth it on a
Let us talk about what the national media did with those stats, because this is the part that should make every Browns fan and every Shedeur Sanders supporter genuinely angry. NFL Live put up the graphic. They showed the completion percentage. They showed the accuracy numbers. They highlighted that Shedeur was inaccurate on more than 1 out of every 5 attempts. That number again, 1 out of every 5, and they presented it as evidence of a quarterback problem. And by quarterback problem, I mean they presented it as a Shedeur Sanders problem. Not an offensive line problem, not a supporting cast problem, not a systemic organizational failure problem, a Shedeur Sanders problem. Here is what John Fanta, on that same broadcast, had the receipts to prove. Shedeur Sanders was operating in an offense that was the worst in the National Football League. Not second worst, not third worst, the worst. Bottom of the league in offensive production, second or third or fourth to last in basically every individual statistical category. And the Browns led the NFL in offensive incompetence. That is the environment in which those accuracy numbers were generated. That is the context that the graphic left off the screen. When you do not have time in the pocket, and Shedeur Sanders had no time in the pocket, you cannot process information, you cannot go through your reads, you cannot put the ball on the money spot because you are either getting hit or scrambling before the route has time to develop. It does not matter if your name is Shedeur Sanders or Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow. No time plus no weapons equals bad numbers. That is not a quarterback evaluation. That is arithmetic. And that is what makes the national media's handling of this, and by handling I mean selective presentation of statistics without context, so genuinely damaging to a young player who deserved better from the people paid to analyze the game fairly. While the Cleveland Browns front office was busy constructing the worst offensive environment in the league, Shedeur Sanders was busy doing everything he could to survive it. And now heading into his second year with an upgraded offensive line, with real receiving weapons around him, with a full offseason of work under his belt and a training camp where the analysts are already noting his elite level preparation, now is when the front office wants to entertain the idea of not starting him?
This is the truest quarterback competition in the NFL. What I mean by that is whoever performs best in training camp should be the week one.
He was a rookie. It was hailing around him, fellow rookies. The offensive line as bad as anyone has ever seen. And now that the conditions have actually improved, now that the Browns went out in the offseason and spent the most money on free agency they have spent in years, now that they drafted new offensive linemen, now that they added wide receivers to go alongside Jerry Jeudy, now that Shedeur Sanders is showing up to training camp in elite shape running routes in the July heat for over an hour, now you want to give him a real shot? Then give him a real shot. Start him on day one. That is what a real shot looks like. Not a competition with the ghost of a dead contract. Not a situation where a young quarterback has to beat out a player whose presence on the roster is entirely about protecting a front office decision that everyone already knows was a catastrophic mistake. A real shot means the job is his to lose, not his to win. There is a difference. And the Cleveland Browns front office needs to understand that difference before training camp begins. Let me be completely clear about the business case one more time, because this is the verdict and I want it to land. Shedeur Sanders is the asset. He is the money. He is the one draw this franchise has right now that generates legitimate national attention and genuine fan excitement. The Deshaun Watson era generated nothing, not wins, not engagement, not optimism, not a single reason for anyone outside of Cleveland to care about Cleveland Browns football. Shedeur Sanders, before he has thrown a single pass in a regular season game with a competent offensive line around him, has already moved the needle more than Watson did in his entire tenure. That is not hyperbole. That is the reality of what name recognition, what generational pedigree, what genuine quarterback talent does for a franchise's visibility and marketability. And here is the number I need you to carry out of this video: inaccurate on more than 1 out of every 5 attempts. That was Shedeur Sanders' rookie season accuracy figure, generated in the worst offensive environment in the National Football League, behind the worst offensive line the analysts had ever seen, with no weapons and no time, 1 out of every 5, in those conditions. And he is still the most compelling quarterback option on this roster. Now imagine what that number looks like with a real offensive line, with real receivers, with a full year of NFL experience and an offseason of elite-level preparation behind him. The Cleveland Browns front office has a choice. They can start their asset, develop their money, and give themselves a legitimate chance at relevance for the first time in years. Or they can protect the sunk cost, run the dead contract one more time, and spend another season explaining to their fan base why the most exciting quarterback they have drafted in a generation is holding a clipboard. My prediction is this: if the Cleveland Browns front office makes the wrong call, if they let front office ego override football logic and delay Shedeur Sanders' start, the fan base revolt will be immediate, the national media narrative will be devastating, and the window to maximize this asset will start closing before it ever fully opened. And by closing, I mean slamming shut, because this league does not wait. Quarterbacks do not develop on pause. And the one thing a franchise cannot afford to waste is the goodwill and excitement that comes with a legitimate young quarterback who is doing everything right. Start Shedeur Sanders. Day 1. No hesitation, no competition theater, no protecting the ghost of a bad contract. Start the asset. Start the money. Start the one reason anyone is watching.
Shedeur Sanders was in an offense last year that was the worst in the National Football League. Okay? I don't care what any statistic says. That the Browns were not last, they were second or third or fourth to last in basically every statistic. And they led the...
Here is what I need from every single person watching this video right now. Drop your honest take in the comments below. Forced choice, no fence sitting. Is the Cleveland Browns front office deliberately setting Shedeur Sanders up to fail? Yes or no? Drop it right now. I want to see where this community stands, because that comment section is going to tell us everything about how Browns fans actually feel about what is happening in that building. If you are not subscribed to Hot News, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. We are going to be all over Browns training camp, all over this quarterback competition, and all over every move this front office makes from now until week 1. You do not want to be the person who misses the video when this story breaks wide open. And click the video on your screen right now, because we have more on this story and the NFL's most explosive front office situations that you need to see immediately. This is Hot News. We'll see you in the next one.
For that opening, Cleveland Browns should be starting Shedeur Sanders this upcoming season. There is nothing to gain from the Deshaun Watson experience except these last hope attempts that maybe some pennies would be worth it on a deal that has not